Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is fast approaching, and I'm wildly excited about it. I'll talk more about my feelings on this PSP classic later, but for this video I really wanted to primarily focus on something else. The game is set to come out December 13th, and in preparation I've been replaying a good amount of Final Fantasy games. A little bit of 9, some of 4, and primarily the original Final Fantasy VII, as well as the subject of this video, Final Fantasy VII Remake. After a wild announcement at E3 2015, FFVIIR, that is not going to last, released on PS4 5 whole years later in 2020, to thunderous indifference. Despite an overall Metacritic score of 87, a lot of what I personally heard at release was a flood of negativity about the game, and if you clicked on this video, I'm sure you heard some of it too. A lot of criticism was levied at this game for one reason or another, but as we all know, both critics and gamers alike are wildly inconsistent in their opinions, to comical effect even. So, I wanted to take a look back. I played this game on release, but this is the first time I've come back to it since then. So, let's use the benefit of hindsight and reevaluate this game. See how it's aged over the last 2.5 years and decide what I like, what I don't like, and most importantly, what I think needs to be improved for Rebirth. So sit back, grab some snacks, and relax while we take a look back at Final Fantasy VII Remake. What's first evident about any modern game you play nowadays is the visuals. It's become a selling point at this stage for who can make the prettiest graphics in today's video game market. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a part of this problem. Despite owning a Switch, I pretty much never played, primarily due to the relatively weak hardware and poor performance of many of the games released on that console. Instead of playing No More Heroes 3 on release, I waited almost 2 months for the game to release on PlayStation 5, purely for the boosted frame rate. I am that guy in every sense of the word. However, for this section of the video, it's a good thing, because I can definitely rip this game to shreds without bias. And back on the PS4 and PS4 Pro, this game definitely had flaws. 30 frames per second target with dips, a standard of that generation sadly, muddy textures mixed with an overfocus on resolution and particle effects that definitely make the games less responsive as a result. Unfortunately, I'm playing on the new and improved PS5 version, so a lot of those problems have been fixed. Performance mode locks the game at 60 frames per second at a resolution ranging from 1500p to 1700p. The graphics mode option does offer a full 4K resolution, along with some other added improvements and graphical effects, but drops back down to a target of 30 frames per second with, you guessed it, dips into the 20s. Needless to say, I picked the performance option for that silky smooth 60 frames per second. The game is buttery smooth in this mode. Really lives up to that legacy Square has built for decades being on the cutting edge of graphics technology. I remember as a kid sitting down to play Kingdom Hearts 2 and being blown away not only by the pre-rendered opening cutscene, but also the in-engine graphics they were able to achieve on a PS2. Maybe this is some semblance of a fanboy in me speaking, but Square games have always been the golden standard of graphics, never failing to push the console to its absolute limits and surprise me with what's doable. The models are wildly detailed. The particle effects, when not tanking the frame rate, are beautiful. This is what a AAA game should look like. Is it the best looking game of all time? No, that's God of War Ragnarok. But it's still well over the baseline of what I should be getting for a full retail priced game. The combat in Final Fantasy VII Remake is extremely fun. Sometimes. Easy is a useless difficulty and leads to stale gameplay. This is a game mode where you mash square ad nauseum until the game is over. Normal is a decent step up, and while still mostly being a mash square simulator, definitely introduces certain enemies and bosses that strategy simply just doesn't work on. Is it a better balance of what I'd like to see the difficulty of a game being? Absolutely. I would have liked to see more instances where I had to menu to win and put strategy into my gameplay. On a second playthrough, hard becomes an option, and thankfully this actually feels like a very challenging way to play the game. Enemies are more difficult, benches only heal you without replenishing your MP, making magic much more scarce. And overall, you're forced to actually use the menuing system all the time, without just spamming attack, block, and roll. Cloud is the most visually stunning character, but his gameplay still boils down to just jamming square, and sometimes triangle, but that's most characters. And while being simple, his combat is flashy and satisfying and scratches that monkey part of my brain that wants to see big sword cut through shit. Barret is sadly the worst one. Holding square down and slowly moving side to side is, as you guessed it, really boring. Which sucks, because I think his redesign might be my favorite of the entire game. Big man with a big gun for a right arm will never not be cool. Tifa, I have been playing more on a second playthrough, and she might be the best in the game. It actually feels closer to an action game than an RPG. She has more of a semblance of a combo system, but still nothing close to the more combat-focused games like Nier Automata, Bayonetta, and DMC5. Her combat is fast, flashy, and fun with little downtime after a combo before you can just jam right back into another one. Aerith is the mage, and you either like playing a mage or you don't, and I very much don't. But she's not horrible. Magic isn't as fleshed out as it is in the turn-based games of this series, but there is a surprising amount of depth to it for an action RPG, with the added bonus of mastering and learning each weapon's abilities to permanently add them to your menu, something slightly pulled from the classic games. It adds that little incentive to play as everyone every now and again, as it applies to all characters. I know the basic attacks aren't what you're supposed to focus on, but I'd still like to see more depth put into the non-menuing attacks. As I said, normal is primarily a mash square simulator, with, you know, a little variation. It is an action RPG. I don't think it's too much to ask for some variety in the action. Take a page from the aforementioned Nier Automata. That's exactly the kind of combat I think I'd like to see in a Final Fantasy game. Of course, that's Platinum, so I'm definitely asking for too much there. But hey, cut me some slack. This whole video is going to be wishlisted. The voice cast is really well done. They're really well casted, at least. The majority of the voices used in the English dub of this game are well placed. Honestly, I'd say a majority are better than their original compilation of Final Fantasy VII voice actors. Cloud sounds like Cloud should. Some edgy kid with, spoilers, brain damage. Sephiroth is fine. The first time I booted up the game, I was initially turned off simply because it wasn't George Newbern. Hell, I would have taken Lance Bass again, but Tyler Hoechlin, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, he was fine. And at least they kept the theme where Sephiroth always seems to be voiced by someone who has also played Superman in some way, shape, or form. I don't know, I'm trying to be positive here. Tifa's voice was good, maybe a little airheady at times. Barrett was good. Aerith was arguably better as Brianna White than Andrea Bowen. Not a diss to Andrea, just Brianna did a really, really good job in this role. The problem isn't the cast. It's not with their voices that they picked, it's with the voice direction. You remember the infamous pizza line?
Yeah. You owe me a pizza.
The fuck? Yeah, this line delivery, it's pretty ass. But you know where the line actually works? Yeah, so the Japanese dub, arguably better. At least in the voice direction department. You can actually hear the emotion through the actors' voices. The second playthrough I used a lot more of the Japanese dub, which I'm going to talk about more later, and it felt much more natural and engaging than the English one. Some of the English dialogue is just way too stilted and stiff and didn't hit what it was trying to accomplish, while the Japanese dub, you know, the language it was originally written in, stitch up the looseness in the dialogue. In the next entry, I'd like to see a much better voice director for the English actors. Oh, and just for fun, here's the pizza line in the French dub.
Tu me dois une pizza.
Haha, oui, bitch. Okay, so the side quests, a staple for RPGs, kind of hit or miss. Go here, press triangle, repeat 30 times, and that's a majority of the side quests in this game. I think the side quests that were more fun were the ones from Chadley? Really? That's his name? Anyway, Chadley's side quests were better and more engaging. Assessing enemies, finding variations, figuring out ways to up the stagger on enemies, all of that was pretty fun and combat focused, and it added a bit more depth to the combat I was already forced to be doing. On the second playthrough, it made it a bit more engaging. Of course, I absolutely could have done this on the first one, but I just didn't. Don't judge me. His VR missions were also pretty challenging. Even after beating the game around level 35 on normal, the first one against Shiva was kicking my ass, and I loved it. I had never been so happy to lose multiple times. It just felt like I was a kid again, trying to beat Sephiroth in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. Well, more Sephiroth in Kingdom Hearts 2, because that one was a bit of a pushover. Anyway, the art of the secret boss fight has always been my favorite aspect of JRPGs, and these were pretty fun as well, and only got more challenging as they progressed. Bahamut? Bahamut. Okay, so what's immediately evident about Final Fantasy VII Remake is that it's not really a remake. Both in the sense that it's not even half the story, and the other thing is that it's, well, that's spoiler, I'll talk about that in a minute. Regardless, what Square essentially did is take the story of Final Fantasy VII, divide it into thirds, more like fifths actually, and only remake this one first fifth section of the game. Midgar is the opening act of Final Fantasy VII, and I fully understand the criticism of why the fuck only this part? Beating the Midgar section of the original Final Fantasy VII takes 7 to 8 hours. It's not very long, at least in comparison to the other 100 hours that a typical replay of Final Fantasy VII takes. So why did Square stretch this 7-hour section of the game into a 30-hour game? I'll never understand. I'm a Final Fantasy veteran, not a speedrunner, so, I mean, I can get through the game in about 6 hours, but a new person who's playing through the game? All the same, it feels a bit forced. But on the flip side of things, Midgar is the opening portion of the game. It's the part of the game that everybody who's even remotely touched Final Fantasy VII has played. Some runs begin and end in Midgar for one reason or another. It is the poster child of Final Fantasy VII. To make a game entirely within this opening act kind of makes sense. Your asset requirement is lessened, something that they clearly very much needed, and you can turn this game into a much tighter part 1 as opposed to trying to do the whole shebang. As far as I know, they're still on track to do 3 parts. I believe that was the original idea, and then they said they'd only do 2 parts, and then they changed their mind back again, and now they're doing 3 again. I don't know. My dad only works for Nintendo. He doesn't work for Square Enix. Whatever. Okay, so since I'm talking about story, even though this game is over 2 years old at this stage, and it's a remake of a game that came out 25 years ago, I'm still going to throw up a spoiler warning here just in case you haven't played it. Because, well, spoiler, this is not like the original game whatsoever. I don't have any idea who this game's made for. It's a remake. At least that's how it's built. So it's trying to introduce a new audience to this game. Remakes are always made with the intention of introducing a brand new audience to a classic game. And you know what? In the opening mission, it really feels like it accomplishes that. But then it immediately takes a left turn and starts hinting at lore that you couldn't possibly know about unless you've played the last one, and Crisis Core, and watched Advent Children, and played a Dirge of Cerberus, and... No, wait, I don't think that one's needed. Don't play that one. Anyway, to pretty much everyone's surprise, and despite being marketed from the ground up as a remake, it's actually somehow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the 6th entry in the Final Fantasy VII series, taking place at the end of the timeline. Because Sephiroth came back after Advent Children to do... I don't really know. I don't know what he's doing. He's doing stuff, though. There's a whole lot of questions left up in the air at the end of this game, but again, who the hell is this game for? If you're doing a remake, that's to get new people into the series, but at the same time, making all of the compilation of Final Fantasy stuff required reading for this, you're alienating all the new people and making the story only really compelling, if you can call it that, to the core audience you've already had for decades. Are the other entries good? Some of them, and some of those you should absolutely be playing before you touch this. The problem is you can't market a game for all audiences, new and old, and then make this complicated ending that only the people who have already consumed the last 400 hours of content can fully understand. I can delay it no longer. It's time to talk about Zack. I am a big fan of Crisis Core. It was my first introduction to Final Fantasy, the first game I ever played in the series, and frankly, my favorite if you count spin-offs. If you don't count spin-offs, Final Fantasy IX. But anyway, so I get a PSP, right? I buy a few games to play on it, and then a friend comes over and sees that I don't own Crisis Core and goes, "Oh, dude, you need to play Crisis Core. Here, borrow my copy." And he loans it to me. The love was instant. It was a wildly fun time, fun characters. It didn't matter that I didn't understand half the callbacks to the original because I was having such a fun time. Of course, I did eventually go back and play the original, but regardless, I fell in love with the character of Zack, and Rick Gomez's voice brought him to life. Caleb Pierce, I believe is how you say his name, does not sound like Zack to me. At all. No discredit to him as a voice actor, but the voice he's giving Zack sounds completely and totally awful to me. Yeah, back to spoilers, Zack shows up at the end of Remake. No clue what he's doing there. I guess Zack is still alive. They gave more information on the intergrade ending, but they still have a lot to explain in the forthcoming games to make this make sense. And considering how beautiful of an ending Zack was given, I need more information before I get excited about it. Regardless, Caleb is, sadly, the whole reason I'm playing with Japanese voices. With him at the helm, I'm definitely not going to be able to play Crisis Core with English voices either. And if he becomes a prominent part of Rebirth and the series as a whole moving forward, I'm gonna be switching to Japanese voices then too. Zack is just a character so close to my heart, I'd rather listen to a voice much more suited to him in a language I don't understand than someone who doesn't sound like him whatsoever. Maybe this is an extreme over-dramatization. I'll give you that. but it's the choice I'm making for the character that's very close to my childhood. Okay, we got off track. But wrapping up, I think Final Fantasy VII Remake is a flawed but enjoyable game. It's a misstep, sure, but I think it's a misstep in the right direction at least. The parts of the game that are just straight up one for one with the PlayStation original are the absolute best parts. Nothing compares to the original game, but it still holds up as a beautiful and stunning homage to that classic game. When it's trying something new, whether that be new story elements or new very basic action RPG elements, or the fucking hallway scenes, like this one, or this one, or this one, or this one. This is unedited. I mean, I don't even know how I would get into the details of editing gameplay footage, but this is real. I understand that the PS4 needed some time to load the next area. I'm not, like, completely dissing the stepping through a crack in the wall so that the game has time to load. That's fine. You know, God of War does that a lot, and I love God of War. But this, you cannot explain to me how this was fucking necessary. I'm gonna let this clip completely play out because this is obnoxious. And this happens a few times in the game. When you're like, okay, I can see the area ahead of me, or in this case, I can't, so it's not loading anything. I'm just holding forward. Yeah, it gives me a few chances to like, ooh, let's look in on this, but why am I moving so slow? I don't understand why this is a part of the game. This is obnoxious. This is the least fun part. I just want to smash things with Big Sword. That's all I want to do. And I'm forced to sit here and watch Cloud crawl through a vent at a snail's pace. It's atrocious. I don't understand what they were thinking with this game design. Why would you do this? Why would you make this part of the game? Why? Like, it doesn't take this long in the original Final Fantasy VII. I mean, like, yeah, you have to crawl through a vent, but, like, it's a lot faster than this. I don't understand. And there were so many times where, like, oh, I could have taken the wrong turn, and I'd have to go somewhere else, and I'd have to turn my ass around and loop back, and it would make this even longer. This is the fastest that this can go. I'm not looking into the rooms. I'm not doing anything. I'm just holding forward, going in the exact direction that I need to, and it takes this fucking long. During those sections, it's flawed. And then during the rest, it's fun. I love it, and I also hate it. I want Rebirth to be good, but I need Crisis Core to be perfect. And this close to release, with the story basically confirmed to be one for one, I think it will be. So I'm bitching into the air. But I'll probably still like Rebirth because I'm kind of a simp for Final Fantasy VII. And I even kind of like Advent Children, though that story kind of blows. I enjoy this series, this little sub-series of Final Fantasy, as well as the overarching series as a whole. I'm not the biggest Final Fantasy fan by a long shot, but it's still something that's very near and dear to my heart. And despite a dip in quality over the past few years, I'm always looking to relive that classic magic I experienced as a kid. Final Fantasy Remake sort of does that. A little at least. As wary as I am, I'm looking forward to Rebirth and how they continue the story that they already told 25 years ago.